I always thought like, I'm so glad I was this way. I'm so glad that I learned to manage my brain in the way that I did. Maybe my life could have been better if I had accommodations earlier. Maybe it would have been worse. Maybe I would have been less interesting. I have no idea. When you're not really an advocate for yourself, it can make your own living environment feel not like a place you want to be in because you are stressed and you don't feel valued and seen. By you, I mean me. Because when you stand on that stage, your brain is like, there is so much potential for you to get rejected. There is so much potential for you to get ousted. There is so much potential for you to die. Once you've done it enough times, your brain is like, okay, I didn't die.
Welcome back to another episode of Late Not Less. I'm your host, Devin Pitts-Rogers, and I'm joined by Alice Draper. Alice Draper is the founder of the podcast guesting agency, Hustling Writers, and the host of the award-winning podcast, My Rejection Story. She's on a mission to make publicity accessible by reframing rejection. Her agency has secured her clients on thousands of podcasts, including Work Life with Adam Grant, Hello Monday with Jesse Hempel, among others. Alice, how are you doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me here, Devin.
How are things in your neck of the woods? I think here it's a little bit cloudy, a little bit tiring, but we'll figure it out. I'm on my second cup of coffee actually right now.
I am here tuning in at 20 to midnight, so it is late for me. I clock off around this time, so I'm staying up extra late for you. So I'm good, but I'm a night owl. I don't know if it's ADHD brain, but I do operate well at night.
Well, thank you so much, because I think for me, even being expected to be up after 9:30 can be a bridge too far, depending on the occasion. So I appreciate the diligence and determination on your end.
Of course. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to dive into our conversation.
Excellent. We've got a fun, or I guess it could be a challenging episode for some folks, since we are going to be talking about things like rejection sensitivity. For me personally, that is something that is evergreen and is always going to be useful because that's something that I myself am working on and could benefit from getting some more insight on in my personal life.
Same here. I started a podcast about rejection, and it's become one of the things that I'm super interested in researching because it is something that I have struggled with immensely throughout my life.
It's tough because you're trying to figure out if your feelings are valid, and of course they're valid, but you try to figure out ways to understand a sort of framing for them. And if it's something that it's worth exploring, having a conversation about, or whether or not you're thinking that maybe you're being overly sensitive in the moment. And for me, I mean, the jury is still out. So it's there's never a definitive answer, it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that learning a little bit about how ADHD brains might be wired a little bit differently, or also what rejection-sensitive dysphoria is, which is coined by William Dodson. And one of his theories is that children with ADHD have experienced, I think it's about 20,000 negative comments by the time they're 10 years old, and that could actually alter the way our brain is wired. Jury is out. No one really knows what causes rejection-sensitive dysphoria. It's not listed in the DSM, but I think that the hundreds of thousands to millions of experiences that have been documented and shared do point to RSD being very common amongst ADHDers specifically.
Yeah, I can't remember what DSM stands for right now, but I do know that it's come up in conversation that it's not recognized, but man, I can definitely feel it. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, same here.
So Alice, I think one of the things we sort of unearthed in our discussion previously, we've had, I think, one or two, is that you're also a part of the super cool group of adults that were diagnosed. So somebody who had to sort of retroactively have things make sense for them. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your journey with us today.
Yeah, of course. I grew up with undiagnosed ADHD, like so many ADHDers. And I was high functioning in many respects. I got what was considered good grades in school. But I've always felt like something was fundamentally wrong with me. I was constantly on the receiving end of the feedback that I have unfulfilled potential. I heard that a lot from teachers. I kind of had just this implicit, my parents never said it directly, but I did feel like a lot of people thought that I could amount to more if I just tried harder, if I just focused. And I believe that. I carried that narrative internally. I thought, every year I was really big in like goal setting from a young age. It'd be like, this is the year I'm going to actually concentrate in class. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to listen to what my teachers say. And I'd buy like 10 new notebooks and label them for each subject. And I was like, this year I will fulfill my potential. And it never lasted very long. I didn't know that I had ADHD for a really long time, but I managed to kind of internally reframe a lot of that stuff as I got older. And I was like, you know what? It's fine that I don't really listen in class, and I figure out other ways to do things. I was like the master of shortcuts. So while other people spent 20 hours studying for an exam, I was able to recognize patterns of like what is going to be assessed in that exam. How can I spend 1 hour studying while you're spending 20 hours? Because I actually couldn't spend 20 hours studying. I couldn't get my brain to do it. But I learned that I could be a lot more efficient than other people. And so I was the master of shortcuts, and it was only much later. It was actually when I needed to work like a real job that I realized that shortcuts weren't going to be as efficient and like actually running my own business, because I couldn't work like for like 4 hours a week and then like chill the rest of the time if I wanted to make progress. And so I started medicating in adulthood. I saw a psychiatrist. I got my diagnosis. And it's kind of changed my life. I do wonder, maybe I would have filled my potential if I received some help earlier.
I do find that can be entertaining to think about. I'm from the perspective of I studied a decent amount of foreign languages and none of them stuck. It was partially because the chance to apply them wasn't terribly high, or the fact that I could have benefited from having a little bit more time. But I think that ultimately it's fun to think about, but the person you are is a reflection of the person you were. So if you had gotten access to those tools, and maybe some more accommodations and support, you could still be a really awesome person, but you might also be a different person. So I tend to find that it might be better to not get too caught up on what could have been, and then just try to use that information, that knowledge to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I have always been on the kind of optimism side of like, oh, this has been my like greatest strength. Having ADHD has developed my personality in some really strong ways. I am now more on a nuanced side where I think that I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that the things that for me are my greatest strengths that derive from having ADHD are also my greatest weaknesses. There are some like serious deficits, but there are some serious strengths, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. And just like you said, I don't know who that person was. I always thought like, I'm so glad I was this way. I'm so glad that I learned to manage my brain in the way that I did. But as I'm kind of getting, I think, a bit more of a nuanced perspective, I'm like, maybe my life could have been better if I had accommodations earlier. Maybe it would have been worse. Maybe I would have been less interesting. I have no idea, but I sort of fall in the middle where I'm like, I don't think, like you said, we could actually know.
And I really like that you use the phrase strengths and deficits, just because I feel like when it comes to neurodivergence in the conversations that you have, depending on the sort of perception of those abilities, they can be reframed as a superpower, but that often means that folks don't think about those support needs long term. And it just creates this weird sort of climate where people feel less empowered because they're not able to show up in their full selves because there is an aspect of them that is basically tolerated, but it's only tolerated in these very specific circumstances versus just kind of acknowledging that there's a whole person who just happens to be neurodivergent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like we risk falling into toxic positivity when we're over focused on just the strengths. and risk falling into like negativity bias when we overfocus on just the deficits or the weaknesses. And so I do kind of aim to like sit somewhere in the healthy middle, because I think then we can like recognize that, you know, we could benefit from actually like coping with or finding the accommodations we need for some of those weaknesses. Like something that I saw language for that just is such a deficit that I have is ADHD tax when it comes to admin. Like I have lost money, like large amounts of money, because I just didn't do the administrative work I needed to do to get paid my money. At the same time, my ADHD brain has made me a lot of money. It's the reason I'm an entrepreneur. It's the reason why I recognize patterns and see opportunity gaps that other people don't see. I mean, I think it's the reason why I have an action bias and tend to like quickly take action and experiment, and where like someone who is more of a planner and likes to be more strategic would spend a lot more time making sure like everything is kind of thought through. I don't think things through. I just take action. So yeah, I agree with you. I think we like really have to make room for both the fact that there are strengths and there are deficits, and that way we have a much more holistic picture and we can find the accommodations we need for some of those deficits.
Absolutely. And I think I'm on the opposite side of the coin where my pattern recognition is a little bit slower. So there's almost this paralysis that I deal with because I worry that I might be acting too soon or there might be additional context that I need. And in some cases, that has absolutely been true. But again, there's still this area where you're trying to think through, okay, well, do you have enough information before you can make a decision? And then you realize that you've been overthinking about whether or not you have enough information. And sometimes you have to, talk to outside sources. Maybe you talk to other people to figure out how they would go about it. And you eventually kind of have to step out of your own head, not just so you can make a decision, but so you're not just burning as much mental energy. And again, it comes down to areas where I feel like I'm more confident versus areas where I feel like I am aware of the knowledge that might be lacking in that scenario.
Yeah. And I think to your point, I think ADHD shows up differently for everyone. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not an ADHD expert, but it is so fascinating. And like I've spoken to Diane Wingett, who's a psychotherapist, and numerous psychotherapists on my podcast as well. And I am continuously fascinated by like how, there are the different types of ADHD and how it shows up differently in different brains. And that's why I think resources like this podcast and learning is so helpful, because we can learn more and figure out where we sit in the spectrum and what accommodations we need.
Exactly. That was one of the ideas, was not only just talking to folks who are professionals, either whether there's a license or just being able to understand how to empower others. I just figured it kind of makes sense to compare notes so that folks can understand what can work for them and what could also maybe not work for them. Unless I'm talking to somebody who is clinically licensed, I'm typically not going to go out and say, this is advice that you should be following. And even when we do say that, there's still the caveat of this won't work for everybody, but hopefully for some people it will. And I think there's one other thing before we get too far away from it. You mentioned ADHD tax, and I don't know who needs to hear it, but cancel that trial subscription because you were about to lose a lot of money.
Yeah, like be careful even before you opt into that trial subscription. How much friction? Ask your AI, how much friction is there in canceling the subscription? Because if they need you to go down some landing page and do some complicated stuff, like maybe just don't sign up for the trial. I was in London in 2024, so like 2 years ago now. And there was you could sign up for the trains, like intercity trains are quite expensive. And it was if you sign up for their card or something, you get a trip, you get a second trip free, and it was going to be €200 that you save. I was like, okay, let me do this. And oh my God, the process to unsubscribe, because I'm I don't live here. I don't want to be paying their monthly fee. I think the first month was free. I just wanted that free trip. And it was so painful. You had to go through some complicated forms and down some wormholes and excruciating for my brain. It's I want to pull my hair out going through this process. long story short, be careful when you sign up for free trials.
Yeah, no joke. That sounds a lot like those gym memberships where you can sign up online, but if you need to cancel it, you have to go in person, which is sort of an interesting dilemma because some folks might have signed up thinking that they were going to make a change. And now that they haven't been able to go to the gym for whatever circumstances that have happened in life, they now have to do the thing to be able to cancel their membership, where chances are if they were able to do the thing, they would need to cancel it in the first place. And it is interesting how often people, well, I guess not people, but businesses will add obstacles to purposely make it harder to cancel a subscription. Like Adobe, for example. They used to, I think they had a process for a while where if you tried to cancel your membership, they would bill you for another month during cancellation. And I think very recently, over the last few years, they were told that they couldn't do that, which is great because you fall into a situation where you keep the membership going because you don't want to be out that money, even though you're not using it. So you would still be out that money all the same, but you might not be out that money all the way because you might still have a use for it. And it's just this weird circular logic. And if you overthink like me, it is a struggle.
Yeah. Honestly, I wish there were more restrictions on the friction because it's so intentional, the friction they create. They put as many loopholes between you. And the gym memberships is such a good example. Like gym memberships, it seems like globally do this where they try and trap you forever in this debit order that there's no way out. You need to go to like their one office, like 3-hour drive away, in order to speak to a consultant in person to cancel your gym membership. Yeah, I agree.
It's diabolical.
Yeah, agreed.
Hey, Steven here. Sorry to interrupt. We just wanted to take a brief moment to tell you about this week's sponsor. At Attention Different, our mission is simple. Offer ADHD adults proven practical strategies for living a more balanced, fulfilled ADHD life. And that is why we are thrilled to offer our latest course, Thriving with Adult ADHD. While other courses might focus on the pain and struggle of being an adult with ADHD, and we do not want to minimize that, this course is designed around accessible, relevant, and applicable techniques that address the most common challenges facing ADHD adults. Inside Thriving with Adult ADHD, you will learn how to create time management systems that are realistic and effective. You'll learn to find balance by optimizing medication, self-care, and professional support. You'll learn to shift your mindset beyond survival mode and instead focus on personal growth. Thriving with Adult ADHD features 2 hours of on-demand video, 10 downloadable resources, lifetime access to the material, and a satisfaction guarantee. Go to attentiondifferent.com/thriving to sign up now. That's attentiondifferent.com/thriving to sign up now. Hey, thanks for the quick break. Now back to the interview.
So as we move forward, I am very curious in hearing about RSD as it's sort of applied in your life, that rejection sensitivity disorder. I think especially as children, you might not remember all the times where you've heard it, but you do start keeping track, and it can be something that's completely inconsequential. But especially, I don't know if you had this experience when you were younger as well, but you didn't present as the quote unquote typical kid with ADHD. So folks just assumed maybe that you were being sensitive, and you can be sensitive. That's completely fine. There just wasn't a lot of help in understanding those things.
Yeah. And I think like there was so little information about ADHD. And even when there is, like even now, I think people don't realize what they're saying can be hurtful. So for me, not presenting typically as ADHD meant that like I wasn't failing school. I feel like even for boys, that was what it took to get diagnosed, was like, okay, yes, for boys, like you're rowdy and causing fights, but also you're probably failing, because my brother has ADHD. He was rowdy. He was in fights. He was like all the kind of like presenting symptoms of ADHD in little boys, but he wasn't diagnosed because he wasn't failing school. So there's that, but then there's all these like behavioral problems that society deems as problems that you're getting told from a young age, that I got told from a young age. It's like, why are you so clumsy? Why are you so messy? Like, if you could just like focus a little bit more, you wouldn't be spilling paint on your shirts, and you wouldn't have this messy chair bag, and you wouldn't have lost your school books again. And so there's all these like little symptoms that you pick up from the millions of people reprimanding you, even your peers being like, look, why can't you just be like us? Like, why is your handwriting so messy, and why are you losing things? You do internalize that something's a little bit wrong with you. And as humans, as very biological, we do not want to get rejected. It is in our means of survival to be accepted by our community. And we know that from a young age. It's really wired into us because we are communal, tribal beings. Historically, we relied on a tribe to get food, shelter, water, protection. And if you are ousted from your tribe, then that means you could die. And as a child, some part of us knows that, we need to be accepted by our families. We actually are very vulnerable as children. And so if you're getting all these micro messages over and over again, that something's not right with you, that you should try a little harder, be a little bit more focused, you're going to go out of your way to avoid rejection, which might present as being more risk averse, so not taking risks that maybe your peers are. Maybe you're not the one that's going and asking the girl on a date or the guy on a date. You're not the one that's like going out and like making the first move to build a friendship or putting yourself out on the line for your career, because history has told you that something's wrong with you. You might get rejected. So for your survival, you're trying to do whatever you can to stay safe. And I think that's totally normal. I don't think that being risk averse is going to help us thrive in adulthood. Sometimes the things that served us well in childhood are the very things that hold us back in adulthood. And that's a big part of what I try to address in the podcast.
Well, Alice, you have your work cut out for you, because this is something that I have recently started unpacking in therapy. Something else that I've sort of noticed as a consequence is there is this feeling, a desire to be understood. And especially at a younger age, you don't necessarily have the words. And you start realizing through adulthood and through those trials and tribulations that maybe you have the words in that self-discovery. But at the same time, you still have to be able to communicate those things to people. And so there can also be this other unintended consequence of being, in some cases, low maintenance. And it's not that you're low maintenance because you genuinely don't have wants or needs or desire for personal agency. It's because you don't feel safe to express them. And that doesn't mean necessarily safe in the sense that you're facing the violence or verbal attacks of any sort, but you don't think that people will give you the space to say these things and feel a certain way, because in some capacity you've been told you're too much from an early age.
Yeah. So there is a very strong correlation between ADHD, RSD, and people pleasing. And so what I think you're touching on is the people pleasing, the low maintenance. Like, I am going to be whoever you want me to be, in a sense. Like, if you want to go watch this movie, I will oblige and say, let's watch this movie, even though I'm really into sci-fi and Project Hail Mary is on. But I don't want to, ruin your day and push my agenda and suggest we watch the sci-fi movie. So those little examples build up over time and make us feel very unseen, very invisible. But as you said, like, when you have received all these micro messages over time that being yourself results in rejection, people pleasing is a very natural response to that. And I completely understand like how we end up there. I struggled with people pleasing a lot, and I think one of my like breaking points of people pleasing was living with roommates, because when I was not living with people, it was easier to go along with whatever they wanted. But when you're living together all the time and you're not really an advocate for yourself, it can make your own living environment feel not like a place you want to be in, because you are stressed and you don't feel valued and seen because you are not the one advocating for yourself. You are not the one putting boundaries for yourself. By you, I mean me. and, and so, yeah, so I totally agree. And we can dive into, changing that, because I do think that it can be changed, but it's a gradual process. But I will stop here for now.
It's all good. It takes some time to unpack. And one of the things that I'm working through right now is this idea that, like, for example, my spouse or my closest friends would give me that space if I express a need in it. For example, my spouse knows that I do have a need for that space, but I can't bring myself to express those things. And it's now the side of it where I didn't think I would have a problem with like voicing wants or needs with really anyone. But now that I've been given this space to just state these things, it feels like trying to look left and right at the same time almost, where rationally, yeah, you should be able to. These people care about you and support you, and they want to know what they can do to help facilitate that. And there's a part of my brain that is still so insistent on keeping itself safe that it's almost like if someone was holding you at gunpoint and said the only way they wouldn't shoot is if you took off a bulletproof vest. And it feels mentally taxing, to say the least.
Yeah, I love the analogy of the only way they wouldn't shoot is if you take off a bulletproof vest, because you've got all this wiring, that you've been wired, your brain has redesigned itself through your childhood and your life to not ruffle feathers, to not express something that maybe is not exactly what everyone wants to hear. So in order for you to actually start doing this, it does feel like taking off a bulletproof vest. And there's what comes to my mind as you're talking are some of my personal stories, but also the stories of some of my peers who have ADHD and have gone through a journey of, I guess, being less of a people pleaser, putting themselves first, less. And I don't like the word people pleasing, because I think that there's nothing wrong with pleasing other people. I think
it feels a little derogatory,
Yeah, I think a better term is self-sacrificing. That's the heart of what we're talking about, which is not being nice to people or caring about people or pleasing people. It's about sacrificing ourselves in the process, allowing ourselves to go unseen, unheard, having few to no boundaries. And what I've witnessed with my best friend, and then also recently I had Dari Crawford, who spoke about getting diagnosed with ADHD as a Black woman in her 40s, is sometimes we only overcome it when we're forced to, and that's not all the time. I think my story is a little bit different, but for my best friend, for example, she burnt out. Fully burnt out, where she couldn't work for 2 years. She couldn't leave her bed for 2 years. She couldn't show up in the way that she had always shown up for people, because she literally had nothing in the tank. And for her, that completely changed things, because she realized that people still loved her, even though she wasn't performing this version of herself that she had been performing for so long, which is I will always be there for you and bring the cupcakes and compliment you and be the bubbly person that makes you feel so good about yourself, because that's what I had been wired to do in order to feel accepted. And she couldn't do that. And so she realized that, her best friends still love her, even at that version of herself. And coming out of that, I've had her on my podcast, she's spoken very openly about this. It changed something in her, which was actually, I can be me, and I can have bad days, and I can say when I don't like things, and it'll be okay. People will still love me. The hardest part for her was realizing that some people weren't okay with that. Some people had chosen to be around her because of that version of her. And so when she couldn't deliver that version of her anymore, there were some relationships she lost. But coming out of it on the other side, she wouldn't trade that for the world, to know that, there are these incredible relationships she has where they love her for her. And then there were some relationships that faded because it was one-sided. And it's kind of a relief to know that and not have to continue a relationship that actually she wasn't really getting anything from in the first place.
That's really awesome. And I'm happy for your friend. It's a little inconvenient that she had to hit that threshold, but I think it's nice that she had no choice but to confront those feelings and actually face those reaffirmations. Because I think when you get stuck in a cycle of self-sacrifice, even if you know there are people who will stick around, you are so fixated on the possibility that someone might not. And that is enough to have you in a state of paralysis where you can sort of identify that these are some areas you need to work on. And these are some things that you need to speak up about, but you can't in any sense force your way to do it. And it's tricky because you can't, until you get to something like a burnout, like your friend experienced, there's only so much that the people that support you can do. And there is something that you have to sort of get the ball rolling on your end to open yourself up to being vulnerable in front of people again. And it can impair your relationships with everyone around you practically. If you have this fear that folks will no longer want to be around you the second that you sort of voice that you sort of need visibility on these things to feel safe and secure in your interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. I like, what you touched on at the end of, it can be hard for people around you. I know that in my kind of worst people pleasing years, it's a disservice to the people that love you when you are self-sacrificing because they can't read your mind. They don't know that when you're saying, yes, it's fine that you can eat my leftover food, that you actually mean, actually, I would like to keep that leftover food, but I feel like you will reject me if I don't say yes. So like I'm giving it to you, or yes, it's fine that your boyfriend eats my food for like the fifth time this week. They can't read your mind. It's not their fault that they're crossing your boundaries because you never communicate with them. And it's really hard for people you love. And so as someone who's been there, like with this best friend, I was in this like position where I'd be like, are you sure? Like, are you sure you want to actually do this? Because I am like, I know what you tend to do. You tend to not like express your needs, but that's not sustainable or fair on people around you to be guessing your needs, and they're inevitably going to get it wrong. And then you potentially building up resentment to them because they have been overriding your needs for so long. And so, yeah, that's the other side of it. And I think that can also help with addressing it. And I know with my friend, she said it was a huge thing when she realized that actually it's negatively affecting friendships when people you love are always worried about whether you're telling the truth or not because they know that you tend to not put yourself first.
And there's also the other part of it too, where if someone doesn't know how something's negatively affected you, of course they're not going to try to do right by you or understand because they don't know they've done something wrong in the first place. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be something wrong, right? I think probably my best example so far around kind of combating this is that I was playing I think it's just a card game, but it's called Trial by Trolley. And it's a trolley problem game where there's teams, there's a conductor, and you have to make a case for why the conductor should take one track versus the other. And I was in the process of trying to make my case, but a friend kept talking over me. And the more I tried to explain my reasoning for why the conductor should take a specific track, the more I got talked over, up to the point where my friend, who was the conductor, so not the person who was talking over me, but a third person, actually picked a track without ever getting my feedback. And there's a part of me where, sure, there's a self-sacrificing element there, but there's a part of me that also struggles with sort of feeling like I'm being deliberately ignored in a moment where something might be important to me. And so I got dysregulated. And my spouse, Sam, she noticed in the moment that I got very loud. And I'm not actually sure if anybody else kind of picked up on it in that moment. And I think later that evening, after we had all gone home, I just sent him a separate text, just explaining, like, yeah, I got dysregulated. I do apologize, but it happened this way, and regardless of whether or not it was intentional, it just kind of made me feel this. And I know that you would never do that on purpose, but I still wanted to talk to you about it. And he really appreciated that I was able to talk to him. And I think that has definitely made me feel a lot closer to this friend. Granted, it's not easy telling people that you might be sensitive or have these things that are vulnerable, because you might know people who that might not ever be an issue for. And people are different, and it can be hard to offer yourself up some space, especially when that space also involves talking to other people about those feelings.
Yeah. Well done for sharing that with your friend. And if I were the friend, I would be immensely grateful. And it sounds like he was, because being able to do that, and when it's being shared with the right person, it is a huge relief for the friend, because the friend probably knows that maybe you don't always share when things weren't going that great or when you're not happy. And so it's like they know this can bring us closer. Like, thank God I know, that you were upset in that moment. Like, now I know better and I know more about you. I'm curious, on this journey, like you said, you're working in therapy. What are some of the things, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the things that
Yeah, of
your
course.
therapist has shared with you in terms of how you can build up, in some ways, like some more resilience to potential rejection, and also being able to like self-sacrifice less?
That there are two different answers for that question. The first one, and we haven't really touched on it in a while, just because there's other items that we're working on. Part of the fun thing about living here stateside in the U.S. is that mental health, health insurance, all of it, it's all fantastic until you actually need it. So I'm grateful that I have insurance, but my therapist is out of pocket. So that means that I don't get to meet with her as frequently as I'd like. That said, one of the things that we had talked about, and I think you are knowledgeable in this area, is exposure therapy. And that one is good because it can be helpful for when you're worried about being told no, and that being like a big source of confrontation in your life. And to that point, I actually have a friend who is running for, I think, state representative for a district here in Denver, Colorado. And I've started helping him by canvassing for his campaign. We've got primaries coming up here in 2026 in June. So that means going door to door and talking to people about his campaign. And I think had I not known about exposure therapy before that, I probably wouldn't have been as open to doing it. But now I'm kind of doing it with the goal of people not wanting to have that interaction. It's been backfiring because people either aren't home or when they do talk to me, they're actually eager to have a conversation around my friend and his platform. But it's baby steps. I'm still trying. And the other part of it is working with my therapist. We are still kind of talking through root cause sort of things. So as we're having these conversations around me not feeling safe enough to be seen as a whole person in my entirety, we've basically been meeting every 2 weeks. We'll talk through more things. She'll ask some pointed questions that'll kind of shed light on some other areas from childhood through adulthood. And then I just leave therapy feeling mentally taxed for the rest of the day. But that's where we're at right now. So there is the exposure therapy side of it, but we're also trying to figure out how all encompassing these things are for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I love that you're doing exposure therapy through the campaign. And there's a few reasons why I think that, one, I think that exposure therapy is a fantastic form of building up some resilience, but I think it has to be done in the right way. And so that, like, just neurologically getting enough reps in of something that triggers rejection sensitivity, triggers cortisol. If you do it enough times, your brain literally just learns, like, oh, that intended outcome, which is the world is going to end. Like, I'm going to die. Like, I'm doesn't happen. We are literally afraid that we're going to die. And so if we do it enough times, we are just showing the brain, oh, I'm not going to die. So like an interesting study, I think it was in, forgetting the author's name, wrote about it. It was in a book that I read where an author spoke about how standing on a stage in front of 1,000 people to give a keynote triggers the same part of the brain as if a lion is chasing you. So this is not even ADHD like prone. This is just anyone standing in front of a stage is just as scared as a human in the wild getting chased by a lion. But the interesting part is that when you have enough reps of standing on that stage, that part of the brain actually quietens down. Because when you stand on that stage, your brain is like, this is so much like attention on you. There is so much potential for you to get rejected. There is so much potential for you to get ousted. There is so much potential for you to die. And once you've done it enough times, your brain is like, okay, I didn't die. It'll still be scared the next time. I don't think anyone is not scared standing on a stage in front of 1,000 people. I don't think that ever dies out. But also that there's a muscle memory. Like as you psych yourself up to go on that stage, you get to look back at your history and know that you did it the 10 other times, 5 other times, 20 other times, and know that in none of those times you died. So you're probably not going to die this time.
See, I always thought that was, and I think learning terms is always important. In my head, I had always interpreted that as a sort of game day jitters, because I was on swim team as a kid. 5 years ago, I did a charity boxing fight, and so there'd be this moment where like you're not exactly overwhelmed by anxiety, but you were working through it. Your heart rate feels like it's a little bit higher. You're suddenly hyper aware of yourself. You're even thinking about how you come off just walking, and you might be even thinking about how you're walking. And so I've been familiar with it in those areas. I am very rarely on a stage by myself, and I think I can sort of diffuse any sort of anxiety by knowing that there's other people there with me. But I think it is something that's also applicable to having that sort of performance anxiety. And I say that because I used to also say that I'm a worrier. And then like 2 years ago, I just realized I'm anxious. So I think even how we talk about these things is fun to unpack and explore.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think another thing I would add also on the like exposure therapy piece is caring about the thing enough to keep doing the reps is a very important piece. And then doing it in community. So the caring enough about it is that, like, for example, campaigning, if you don't care about the end goal, which is to win the campaign or the party that you're campaigning in behalf of, you're probably unlikely to endure the discomfort of that people slamming a door in your face or telling you to like F off or whatever else they say, to keep doing it enough to actually like build up a bit of a muscle to know that you can survive. So my like experience of building up rejection resilience was in my writing career, getting rejected hundreds of times. And I was able to sustain that because I really, really cared about being a writer. And I think I cared about that more than I did to like date or make friends, because I wasn't putting those reps in that side of my life. It felt scarier. I think in general, it is actually probably scarier to do the social connection piece. But getting that muscle memory of like getting rejected over and over again, and then also getting like great wins in between that and great acceptances, getting really good at something, getting a lot more confidence, gave me the confidence to get rejected in other areas of my life, which I didn't have previously. So I would really recommend finding what you care about if you are seeking exposure therapy, and then the other pieces, don't do it alone, because the biggest part that makes us so scared of rejection is being ousted, being alone, especially if you're doing it with people. But even if you are not doing it with people, but you have people you can turn to and be like, you know what? Today I just went and got rejected 10 times by like this agencies that I'm pitching as an actor, or I got 20 doors slammed in my face or whatever. And there are people who you trust, whose judgment you trust, saying like, that's awesome, well done, like go you, keep doing that. It literally like calms your brain down, because you're like, oh, it's okay. Like my community knows this, accepts it, even celebrates this. Like, this is the opposite of what I thought. I thought I was going to get kicked out of my community because that guy slammed the door in my face earlier today.
See, I find that interesting because for me, it never even once occurred to me to try and do something that I wasn't invested in, because I feel like when you're not invested, if you're a little bit more cynical in how you approach it, you also might be looking for an excuse to fail, to say that it didn't work. So it never even dawned on me to try that with something I didn't care about. I think on my end, I probably could use some more examples of how to do that, like with personal relationships, because I think when it comes to things like, like auditions, job applications, in the current environment, there is so much going on that so many of these different tools, these platforms, and the people that use them probably aren't even getting to know enough about you to make a judgment call based on the content of your being. And so I find that for me, and maybe for some of our listeners too, it could also probably be useful to have some more concrete examples, whether it's, trying to get someone to go to the movies, or I guess just inviting people to something and being told no. What are some other ways that folks can practice that exposure on their own?
Yeah. So, like, you brought up such a great point, which is that it didn't even occur to you to do something that you don't care about. And I'm the exact same. Like, I actually kind of prior to this 100 rejections I did, I used to do promo work when I was in college and in high school, and literally like handing out flyers or promoting alcohol, trying to sell things, promoting soya milk in the supermarkets. And that's like nonstop rejection. Like, people don't want to be sold things, obviously, like lessons in sales, but nonstop rejection. And I cared about money. Like, I really cared about money. I wanted to be financially independent as I could as a 17-year-old. I wanted to be able to like go out with my friends on the weekend and not be stuck at home because like I had a small allowance. My allowance wouldn't allow me to go with friends the weekend. So that was like my underlying motivation. So I think people, if someone's going to go out, just figure out what that underlying motivation is. And so the reason why I brought up the caring is because there are these rejection challenges going around and I think they're awesome, where these creators are going and getting rejected every single day. And like posting about it. So it's like, I went to the coffee shop and asked if I could change the Wi-Fi password, like doing things that literally the intent is to get rejected. And a friend of mine did a challenge herself and wrote about it for Very Well Mind, and she referenced this podcast. And I asked her, like, how did it go? And she was like, honestly, like, it felt kind of weird. Like, I felt weird asking my friend if he could lend me money when I didn't need the money. And she said she was doing it purely for a journalism assignment. And what I recognized as kind of being a little bit off about her challenge was, I don't think that she had a very strong reason why she was doing it. There was a journalism assignment, but I don't know if that's like strong enough reason. And also she was doing it alone. So like, it feels weird to like go and ask someone to lend you money when you don't need the money, and then they say no, and then like you have no one to talk to about it. And so it's not rooted in purpose. It's not like, I'm trying to get funding for this business I really, really care about, and I'm going to withstand someone saying no. So that's where I share the purpose thing. And so with all that said, I would think of like micro ways you can advance a purpose you have. So like going to the gym, I say micro because I think that you're not going to, on your first day of going to a gym, go and pick up like the heaviest deadlift. You probably start with the dumbbells, maybe start with 2.5 kilos and work your way up from there. So that's where the micro rejections come in. And then like reverse engineer from something you really care about. So maybe your dream has always been to become a part-time swimming coach or collaborate with some like big swimming coaches. Micro rejections don't have to be like tiny things you're chasing, but when the further out you go, the less scary they are. So if you are going to your friend who is like a well-esteemed swimming coach and saying to them, hey, can you teach me, like, can you connect me to your network or whatever it is? That's a big rejection because that's someone in your community. And if they say no, it's going to really hurt, especially if you haven't built up some resilience and you're not super confident about like what you're up to. So start further out. That's what I mean by micro rejections. Maybe you are emailing people you don't know who are experts in the industry. Maybe you're starting a podcast about like best swimming practices, and then you are emailing people you admire but you've never met before, inviting them to become guests in your podcast. That like is a great exposure therapy because they're not going to remember you if they reject you. They're not part of your community right now. You will feel uncomfortable and scared in the beginning, but after a while, it's going to get easier and easier and easier. And you will get those reps in. You'll build up some confidence. And then eventually you will have probably the confidence to go to your friend and ask them on your podcast, and then have the confidence to ask them if they will expose you to your network and build up from there. And be okay if they say no, because once you do it enough times and you build up like these reps, you'll get more comfortable with those no's, because no's are so normal and not rooted in you most of the time.
I'm definitely going to have to use that one just because I do find myself with some guests where there's this waiting for like the perfect moment where it's like where maybe we have X number of listeners, or maybe we've had this really cool guest that went on right before we reach out. And something that I keep saying that I think has come up more than once on this podcast, maybe not, is this feeling of perfection, right? You have to stick the landing in addition because you're worried that you're worried that there's a possibility that someone will say no, but you're also worried that you didn't lead with your best foot. And so something that I saw online was that it doesn't have to get done. It just has to be perfect. And so when that works in with that rejection sensitivity concern, you just kind of get stuck in a loop. So I'm going to give myself homework to actually fire off a couple of these Hail Marys that I've been thinking about to myself.
Yeah. And on that, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to be done, is the action bias. As a rejection challenge creates an action bias without us realizing it. So it's for the people like, because I think I do have an action bias, but I didn't in my writing career because I cared so much about it that I would just like obsess over making things perfect and stuff. And so the goal of a rejection challenge is to get into that action bias of like, when you are focused on getting rejected, you are focused on delivering as much as possible without thinking too much. And that's where like the beauty comes, because you're like, I've had people from my podcast set up their own rejection challenges and say to me like, oh my gosh, my business kicked off and I got like this unexpected partnership and all this stuff, because they were not so focused on, am I going to land this person? They were just like, got to send this off, got to meet my rejection quota. And then these like amazing things happened. So yeah, I highly support that. And I think the goal is to get those pitches or requests or asks out there into the world.
That's solid. The other thing that I do have to steel my nerves for, just with rejection challenges in general, is the possibility that it's not a no. I kind of like it. I kind of compare it to having shirts that have very specific text on them, in that you don't know what to prepare for when you put that energy out there in the world. So for example, I've got a shirt that says Waffle Home in the Waffle House font. But that means that people will stop me in public because they have really strong opinions about Waffle Houses. We were getting married in Las Vegas and I flew in with my Waffle Home shirt, and the guy on the strip is telling me about the Waffle Houses in the state of Colorado. And there's another shirt I had that said, Vulcan in the streets, Klingon in the sheets. And a lady told me that her husband was the same way. And so I had figured, okay, so there's just certain things that you can't prepare for when you are interacting with people in the public. And so I also have to have a little bit of I wasn't expecting a yes here. I think for the ones where there's a concern around, maybe asking a friend for money when you don't need it, I think I probably would want them to be more practical things, so that if it is a no or if it is a yes, there's not this weird pause where we have to kind of come back and have a conversation around it. So to your point, I think I'm going to have to be really particular with which things I choose to try and have these challenges around. But with getting podcast guests, I think that one will be a great experience.
Yeah. If you tend to overthink like the different possibilities and stuff, do something that feels repeatable, and like an yes would be great. So like that's where like pitching podcast guests, like, get your list of people, be like, this week we are getting, I don't know, this month we're getting 100 podcast rejections. We're pitching all these like dream people, then what? Worst case, they say yes, and you have too many podcast guests, so you can schedule them out over a couple of months, and then you'll have a full roster, and life looks pretty good.
Yeah, that would be the best kind of problem to have. Plus, like I have a job in consulting outside of this, so it's going to have to be spaced out like that. And so to have a consistent group of people to have these fun conversations with would be pretty cool. Not going to lie.
Yeah. You have your rejection challenge set out for you, Devin.
I really do. I think in my heart, I knew that. It's just sometimes it's good to get external validation. Sometimes there's things that you're holding off on accepting until someone else kind of brings it up. And then you go, okay, yeah, maybe I should get that thing checked out. That's fair. I think this episode has been good for other people. I think it's been specifically useful for me. I really appreciate you being on this episode, Alice. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else, because I'm thinking about rejection sensitivity as it sort of applies to younger folks. So, there might be people who are parents with kids who are very sensitive. I guess, do you have any sort of recommendations on how people, especially folks who are in the care of young ones, can sort of understand that rejection sensitivity?
That's a really good question. For folks who are in the care of young ones, I think that they can have a big impact on rejections. This is purely like based off my readings and my theory, and a lot of people would argue differently. So it's probably like a nature versus nurture, and I'm more on the nurture camp. I do think nature plays a big role in things, but I am also I think we have control over nurture. So I think parents can play a big role, but they can't protect their kids completely. So for example, you have a child with ADHD who's experiencing, similar to what you and I spoke about, a lot of negative comments. You can't necessarily stop that from happening from teachers or peers or friends. But you can make your home a judgment-free zone. You can not necessarily have no consequences, but just be mindful of the comments you're making. If you're constantly telling your child they're such a klutz or so messy, or not like their sibling, or not like the other kids at school, or little comments like that seem meaningless in the moment, I think that they can have a big impact as they compound. You can still say it to your kid. I mean, I really do credit, I think, some things my mom did that I know are very rare. I'm very clumsy. She never shouted at me for breaking things. She would just be very calm, very regulated, and she'd be like, okay, cool, will you just clean that up? But not in a tone that seemed annoyed or angry. I was very messy, and we had someone come clean the house once a week, and my mom would just say, Alice's room's not getting cleaned, just close the door. She never shouted at me, screamed at me, did anything. She's just like, I'm not making someone go and clean that crazy room. If you want her to clean your room, put away your stuff, and then she'll sweep your floor and do that stuff. But I wasn't in that way judged. And so it's not so just let your kid get away with everything, but just be aware of what they can and can't control, and be aware of how much judgment you're casting on them. And I think that can make a big difference.
Yeah, you can hold space for people without enabling behavior that might be a little bit harmful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we tend to have conversations on this show around adulthood ADHD. I just figured, might as well just try to have a little bit of something for folks who have kids with ADHD, just because if we're talking about folks who are navigating adulthood, there's a pretty decent possibility that those folks are also navigating parenthood of other people with ADHD.
Yeah, and I would recommend reading the books. There are experts who can talk about this and speak on it from an expert level. I'm not an expert. I don't have kids. I just was a kid once with ADHD. So that's the perspective I'm talking about.
Same. I usually say that I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just a mental health enthusiast. So I definitely feel you there.
Same. Love that.
Where else can we find you?
I am all over the internet. I think Instagram is a good place. Alice at Alice Draper on Instagram. And my podcast, My Rejection Story, where I interview great people. I think we connected through Meredith Carter. She was a guest on my podcast. I talk to lots of ADHD folks. I also talk to other folks about all facets of rejection and how to build rejection resilience.
That's awesome. And yeah, shout out to Hummingbird ADHD, Meredith Carter, who's also a friend of the show. She's also doing really cool stuff. So go ahead and check out both Alice as well as Meredith. I don't have anything else. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it here, Alice. So thank you so much for being on this episode with me today.
Thank you so much, Devin. It was a pleasure to be here.
I'm your host, Devin Pitts-Rogers, and this has been another episode of Late Not Less. Talk to y'all soon.